The medieval world was a place where imagination and reality danced together in the most extraordinary ways. Picture, if you will, the Europe of the 12th and 13th centuries, a landscape where vast forests stretched beyond the horizon, dotted with small villages that glowed warmly in the evening light. The people of this time lived in a world that was intimately connected to the rhythms of nature, where the changing seasons brought not just different weather, but entirely different ways of understanding the world around them. In these times, when the sun set behind the rolling hills and ancient oak trees, families would gather around hearth fires that cast dancing shadows on stone walls. The flames would flicker and sway, creating patterns that seemed almost alive, and in these moments of quiet togetherness, stories would begin to flow like gentle streams. These weren't just entertainment for the long winter evenings, they were the very fabric that held communities together, passing down wisdom, comfort, and wonder from one generation to the next. The medieval mind was beautifully open to mysteries that we might struggle to understand today. When a villager walked through the forest and heard the whisper of wind through leaves, they didn't just hear air moving through branches. They heard the gentle voices of nature spirits, benevolent beings who watched over the woodlands with ancient wisdom. When morning mist rose from meadows like silver veils, it wasn't simply moisture evaporating in the warming air, it was the breath of the earth itself, a sign that the world was alive and breathing just as they were. These people lived in harmony with cycles that modern life has largely forgotten. The agricultural year shaped everything. The spring planting filled with hope and possibility, the summer growing season rich with abundance, the autumn harvest bringing gratitude and celebration, and the winter months offering time for reflection, storytelling, and the deep rest that allows wisdom to grow. Each season brought its own particular magic, its own special stories, and its own gentle mysteries. In the villages scattered across this medieval landscape, craftsmen worked with skills passed down through generations of careful apprenticeship. The blacksmith's forge glowed like a warm heart in the community, where iron was shaped not just into tools and horseshoes, but sometimes into protective charms that carried the hopes and dreams of their makers. The village weaver created not just cloth, but patterns that told stories, threads that connected each person to their community and their heritage. The churches and monasteries of this time were centers of learning and contemplation, where monks and nuns devoted their lives to copying manuscripts by candlelight, preserving knowledge and stories with infinite patience and care. In the scriptoriums, where these patient souls worked, illuminated manuscripts bloomed with colors that seemed to glow from within, deep blues like midnight skies, rich golds like captured sunlight, and gentle greens like spring meadows. These books weren't just repositories of information, they were works of art that celebrated the beauty of knowledge itself. Markets and fairs brought people together from distant villages and towns, creating temporary communities where stories, goods, and traditions mixed and mingled like ingredients in a wonderful stew. Traveling merchants brought tales from far-off lands, musicians shared songs that had been sung for generations, and storytellers wove new versions of ancient tales that reflected the hopes and dreams of their audiences. The medieval understanding of the world was layered with meaning in ways that created a rich tapestry of folklore. A simple spring that bubbled up from the earth wasn't just a source of water, it might be a sacred place where healing could be found, where wishes could be made, where the boundary between the ordinary world and the realm of mystery became wonderfully thin. Ancient standing stones weren't just markers in the landscape, they were doorways to understanding, places where the wisdom of countless generations seemed to gather and whisper to those who knew how to listen. The forests of medieval Europe were vast and deep, filled with a green twilight that created perfect conditions for wonder and contemplation. These weren't the manicured woodlands we might know today, but wild, ancient places where enormous trees had stood for centuries, their roots intertwining deep beneath the earth, their branches creating cathedrals of living wood that inspired awe and reverence. In these forests, Every rustle of leaves, every play of sunlight and shadow, every unexpected clearing or babbling brook became part of a larger story about the interconnectedness of all living things. The people who lived closest to these forests developed a profound understanding of their rhythms and seasons. They knew which plants could heal, which berries were safe to eat, where the clearest springs could be found, and how to read the signs that predicted changes in weather. This knowledge wasn't just practical, it was deeply spiritual, connecting them to the living wisdom of the earth itself. As evening approached in these medieval villages, and the work of the day drew to a gentle close, families would prepare for the night with rituals that connected them to generations of their ancestors. Herbs would be hung to dry, bringing pleasant fragrances into the home. Fires would be banked carefully to provide warmth through the night. Children would be gathered close for the stories that would help them understand their place in the great ongoing tale of their community and their world. These evening stories weren't meant to frighten or disturb, but to illuminate the mysterious beauty of existence. They spoke of helpful spirits who watched over travelers, of wise creatures who offered guidance to those who treated them with respect, of magical transformations that revealed the hidden connections between all things. The folklore of medieval times was, at its heart, a celebration of the wonder that exists just beyond the edge of ordinary perception, a gentle invitation to see the world with eyes of reverence and gratitude. As we settle more deeply into this contemplative journey through medieval folklore, imagine yourself as a peaceful observer in this ancient world, someone who has been granted the privilege of witnessing the gentle unfolding of stories that have brought comfort and wonder to countless generations. The transition from the bustling activity of medieval daily life to the quiet magic of evening creates a perfect threshold for entering the realm where folklore begins to bloom. Picture a typical evening in a medieval village as the sun begins its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of soft amber and rose. The day's work is drawing to a close. Farmers are returning from fields where they've tended crops that will sustain their communities through the coming seasons, shepherds are guiding their flocks back to safety, and craftspeople are putting away their tools with the satisfaction that comes from honest labor completed with care and skill. The village church bell rings out across the landscape, its bronze voice carrying clearly through the still air, calling people to evening prayers but also serving as a gentle reminder that the community is gathered safely together for another night. The sound echoes off the stone walls of houses and barns, bounces gently from the surrounding hills, and seems to settle like a blessing over the entire village, creating an atmosphere of peace and protection. As twilight deepens, the first cooking fires begin to send wisps of fragrant smoke rising into the clear air. The scents that drift from medieval kitchens tell their own stories, hearty stews simmering slowly in iron pots, fresh bread baking in stone ovens, herbs and vegetables from carefully tended gardens adding their distinctive fragrances to the evening air. These are the smells of comfort and nourishment, of communities taking care of their own, of the simple but profound satisfaction that comes from sharing food prepared with love and attention. In the doorways of houses, women sit with their mending or their spinning, making productive use of the last light of day while keeping a watchful eye on children who play quiet games in the village square. Their fingers work with the automatic skill that comes from years of practice, leaving their minds free to observe the gentle rhythms of their community settling into evening routines. These moments of quiet activity create a sense of continuity and stability, connecting each day to all the days that have come before and all the days that will follow. The transition from day to night in medieval times was a gradual process that allowed people to shift naturally from the active engagement of daylight hours to the contemplative mood that evening brings. Without the harsh artificial lighting that characterizes modern life, people in medieval times experienced the settling of darkness as a gentle embrace, a natural invitation to turn inward and explore the realms of story, memory, and imagination. As shadows begin to lengthen and merge with one another, creating pools of soft darkness beneath trees and in the corners of courtyards. The boundary between the ordinary world and the realm of folklore begins to feel wonderfully permeable. This is the magical hour when stories begin to feel not just possible, but inevitable, when the imagination opens naturally to possibilities that daylight might have held at bay. The medieval understanding of this transition time was profound and beautiful. They recognized that twilight was neither fully day nor fully night, but something entirely its own, a threshold time when the veils between different ways of seeing the world grew thin and translucent. In this gentle liminal space, the folklore that would emerge wasn't seen as separate from reality, but as another layer of truth, another way of understanding the mysterious beauty of existence. Children playing in the village square begin to sense this shift without fully understanding it. Their games naturally become quieter, more imaginative, as if they're instinctively preparing to receive the stories that will soon unfold. They gather closer to the adults, drawn by an intuitive understanding that evening brings different gifts than daylight hours, gifts that require stillness and attention to fully receive. The adults in the community recognize this transition as well, and begin to create the conditions that will welcome the emergence of folklore and story. Chairs are arranged in circles around hearth fires. Candles are lit with ceremony and care, their steady flames creating pools of warm light that seem to gather people together like gentle arms. The pace of conversation slows, becoming more thoughtful, more reflective, as people naturally attune themselves to the contemplative mood that evening brings. In the surrounding countryside, the landscape itself seems to participate in this daily transformation. Fields that blazed with activity during daylight hours settle into stillness, their crops rustling softly in evening breezes that carry the sense of earth and growing things. Forest edges that marked clear boundaries during the day seem to soften and blur, creating the impression that the woodlands are reaching out with gentle fingers to touch the cultivated lands, reminding everyone of the wild wisdom that surrounds and sustains their ordered communities. Wells and springs that provided practical necessities during the day begin to reveal their more mysterious aspects as evening deepens. The sound of water bubbling up from deep within the earth becomes more noticeable in the growing quiet, creating a gentle music that seems to speak of hidden connections, of underground rivers that link all places and all times, of the continuous flow of life that moves through all things. Ancient trees that stood like patient guardians during the day begin to take on the qualities of wise elders as twilight transforms their familiar forms into shapes that suggest vast experience and gentle protection. Their branches, outlined against the darkening sky, seem to gesture with the slow grace of beings who have witnessed countless generations of human joys and sorrows, who have learned the deep patience that comes from existing in harmony with the great cycles of nature. Stone walls and buildings that provided practical shelter during daylight hours begin to reveal their deeper significance as gathering places for community and story. The stones themselves seem to hold memories of all the conversations they've witnessed, all the stories they've heard, all the moments of human connection that have unfolded within their embrace. These aren't just practical structures, but repositories of collective memory, places where the wisdom of the community gathers and is preserved. As this gentle transition continues, people find themselves naturally drawn to the places where stories traditionally unfold, the great hearth in the village hall, the comfortable common room of the local inn, the peaceful cloistered garden of the monastery where monks gather for evening prayers. These spaces have been shaped by countless evenings of storytelling, worn smooth by generations of people seeking the comfort and wisdom that folklore provides. The very air seems different as evening deepens, charged with possibility and wonder, as if the approaching darkness is not an absence of light but a presence of its own, carrying with it all the gentle mysteries that daylight holds in abeyance. This is the time when folklore begins to stir, when the stories that have been sleeping quietly in the depths of community memory begin to wake and stretch, preparing to offer their gifts of wisdom, wonder, and gentle transformation to all who are ready to receive them. As the medieval evening continues its gentle embrace of the village, we find ourselves naturally drawn into the spaces where folklore comes alive, where the stories that have sustained communities for generations begin to unfold like flowers opening in the moonlight. These are sacred spaces not because they've been formally consecrated, but because they've been worn smooth by countless evenings of human connection, shaped by the collective breath and laughter and wonder of people seeking to understand their place in the great mystery of existence. Imagine stepping across the threshold of the village's greatest storytelling space, perhaps the common hall where the community gathers for celebrations and important meetings, or the comfortable chamber of a monastery where monks welcome visitors with warm hospitality, or even the cozy main room of the village inn where travelers share tales from distant lands. Whatever form this space takes, it has been transformed by evening's magic into something that feels both ancient and eternal, a place where time moves differently and the ordinary rules of existence seem wonderfully relaxed. The first thing you notice as you enter this sanctuary of story is the quality of the light. Candles and oil lamps create pools of warm, golden illumination that seem to breathe and pulse with gentle life. These flames don't harsh against the darkness but dance with it, creating an interplay of light and shadow that turns every surface into a canvas for imagination. The flickering light transforms familiar objects into mysterious shapes that suggest rather than define, leaving space for the mind to wander and wonder. The air in this space carries the mingled fragrances of all the elements that make medieval folklore possible: the clean smell of beeswax candles, the earthy aroma of herbs hanging from rafters to dry, the comforting scent of well-seasoned wood that has absorbed years of warmth and human presence, and underneath it all, the indefinable but unmistakable fragrance of story itself, as if words spoken with love and attention leave their own gentle residue in the very atmosphere. The furnishings of this space have been arranged with the kind of unconscious wisdom that comes from generations of people understanding how to create conditions for genuine community. Chairs and benches form irregular circles and clusters, creating intimate spaces for conversation while maintaining connection to the larger group. Tables hold simple refreshments, perhaps warm cider made from apples grown in local orchards, or herbal teas brewed from plants gathered in nearby meadows, or fresh bread still warm from the evening's baking. These aren't elaborate feasts but simple offerings that nourish both body and spirit. The walls of this gathering space tell stories of their own through the objects that hang from them, perhaps a tapestry woven by local craftspeople, depicting scenes from the agricultural year that shapes community life, maybe tools of various trades arranged with pride, celebrating the skills that keep the community thriving, or illuminated manuscripts open to pages that glow with color and careful calligraphy, reminding everyone of the beauty that can emerge when human creativity is dedicated to preserving wisdom and wonder. As people settle into this space, they undergo a natural transformation that mirrors the day's transition into night. Voices become softer, more reflective. The urgent concerns of daylight hours fade into the background, replaced by the deeper currents of meaning and connection that evening reveals. Bodies relax into the comfortable embrace of well-worn furniture, and faces take on the peaceful expression of people who know they are exactly where they belong. The community that gathers in this space represents the full spectrum of medieval village life: farmers whose hands still carry the honest dirt of their fields, craftspeople whose fingers bear the calluses of their trades, mothers and fathers whose faces show the gentle wear of caring for their families, children whose eyes sparkle with curiosity and wonder, and elders whose lined faces speak of all the stories they've witnessed and all the wisdom they've accumulated over their long lives. This gathering isn't formal or structured in the way we might expect from a modern event. Instead, it unfolds with the organic rhythm of a community that knows how to be together without needing elaborate organization or entertainment. Conversations begin quietly in small groups, weaving together concerns about the day's work, observations about the changing seasons, gentle gossip about neighbors and friends, and the thousand small connections that bind a community together. As the evening deepens and the candles burn lower, these scattered conversations begin to merge and flow together like tributaries joining a river. Someone mentions an unusual bird they spotted near the forest edge, and this observation connects to someone else's memory of old stories about birds that carry messages between the world of humans and the realm of spirits. A question about why certain springs never freeze leads to gentle speculation about the underground rivers that connect all water sources, and from there to ancient tales about water spirits who ensure that communities always have access to the life-giving gift of clean water. The transition from ordinary conversation to the formal telling of folklore happens so naturally that it's impossible to say exactly when it begins. Perhaps an elder responds to a young person's question with a phrase like, "That reminds me of a story my grandmother used to tell," or maybe someone mentions a local landmark and another person begins to share the traditional tale associated with that place. However it starts, the shift is recognizable to everyone present. Voices take on the special cadence reserved for storytelling, listeners settle into the particular kind of attention that stories require, and the space itself seems to expand to accommodate the larger truths that folklore carries. The stories that begin to emerge in this perfect atmosphere aren't the frightening tales that might come to mind when we think of medieval folklore, but the gentle, wisdom-filled narratives that communities use to understand their world and their place within it. These are stories about the benevolent spirits who watch over travelers, ensuring they find safe shelter and clear paths. Tales about wise animals who share their knowledge with humans humble enough to listen and learn. Narratives about magical transformations that reveal the hidden connections between all living things. Each story is told not as a performance but as a gift, shared with the kind of generosity that expects nothing in return except the simple pleasure of connection and understanding. The storytellers aren't professional entertainers but community members who have been entrusted with preserving and passing on the collective wisdom of their people. They speak with the authority that comes not from formal training but from deep love and respect for the stories themselves. As each tale unfolds, the listeners participate not just through their attention but through their very presence, their breathing, their subtle responses that let the storyteller know the story is being received and appreciated. This is a living tradition, shaped by each telling and each listening, evolving naturally while maintaining connection to its ancient roots. The physical space seems to support and enhance this storytelling in mysterious ways. The flickering candlelight creates visual effects that illustrate the tales being told, throwing shadows that dance like the characters in the stories. The ancient wooden beams overhead seem to lean in to listen, as if they too are part of the community gathered to receive these gifts of wisdom and wonder. Even the stones in the walls seem to absorb the words being spoken, storing them like a library that exists beyond the reach of time. In this sanctuary of story, the boundary between the listeners and the tales being told begins to blur in the most beautiful way. People don't just hear about magical transformations, they feel themselves being gently transformed by the act of receiving these ancient gifts. They don't just learn about the spirits that inhabit the natural world, they sense their own spirits awakening to possibilities they'd forgotten existed. They don't just listen to stories about connection and community, they experience the deep satisfaction of being truly connected to something larger and more meaningful than their individual concerns. This is the threshold where folklore begins to work its gentle magic, where ancient wisdom starts to seep into modern consciousness like warm water soaking into dry earth, preparing the ground for the deeper experiences that the night will bring. As the evening settles more deeply around the gathered community, and the first stories have created an atmosphere of gentle wonder and connection, we find ourselves naturally progressing into the heart of the folkloric experience. This is the time when the tales begin to take on a life of their own, when the boundary between storyteller and audience, between past and present, between the possible and the actual, becomes beautifully blurred in the soft candlelight and the warm embrace of shared imagination. The stories that emerge during this phase of the evening carry a different quality than those that came before. Where the earlier tales served to transition the community from the practical concerns of daylight to the contemplative mood of evening, these stories begin to work more directly on the soul, offering the kind of nourishment that can only be found in the deep wells of collective wisdom that folklore represents. They are stories that have been polished smooth by countless tellings, worn into perfect forms by generations of people seeking guidance, comfort, and connection to the mysterious forces that shape human existence. Imagine listening to a tale about a medieval village very much like the one you find yourself in tonight, where the people live in harmony with the rhythms of the natural world and maintain a respectful relationship with the spiritual forces that inhabit the forests, streams, and ancient places of their landscape. In this story, the villagers understand that they are not separate from nature but part of it, woven into the great tapestry of existence through bonds of mutual care and respect. The tale might tell of a village baker who rises before dawn each morning to prepare bread for the community, working by the light of a single candle that casts dancing shadows on the walls of the bakery. This baker has inherited not just the skills of bread-making from the generations that came before, but also the knowledge of certain words and gestures that ensure the bread will carry more than mere physical nourishment. As the baker kneads the dough with practiced hands, ancient blessings are whispered into the mixture, intentions of health and community and love that will be shared with everyone who tastes the bread. One morning, the story continues, the baker discovers that the usual supply of flour has been mysteriously enhanced during the night. The grain seems to glow with an inner light, and when ground into flour, it carries the fragrance of wildflowers and the essence of rain-washed earth. Investigation reveals that benevolent spirits of the grain, grateful for the baker's daily practice of blessing the bread, have infused the flour with their own gifts, ensuring that this batch of bread will carry not just physical sustenance but spiritual nourishment as well. The bread baked from this blessed flour works gentle miracles throughout the village. Those who eat it find their daily labors feeling lighter and more meaningful. Disputes that have simmered for weeks are suddenly resolved as people rediscover their natural affection for one another. Children who have been restless and difficult settle into peaceful play, and elders who have been troubled by old sorrows find their hearts filled with contentment and gratitude for the simple gifts of existence. This story, like all the best folklore, works on multiple levels simultaneously. On its surface, it's a charming tale about the mysterious ways that kindness and dedication can be rewarded. At a deeper level, it speaks to the profound truth that our daily actions, performed with love and attention, have the power to nourish not just our own spirits but the spirits of everyone around us. And at the deepest level, it reminds listeners that we live in a world where the spiritual and the practical are not separate realms but different aspects of a unified reality that responds to our intentions and our care. As this story unfolds in the candlelit space, listeners find themselves naturally identifying with different elements of the tale. Some connect with the baker's quiet dedication to serving the community through honest work performed with love. Others are drawn to the image of benevolent spirits who notice and reward acts of kindness. Still others find themselves thinking about their own daily routines and wondering how they might infuse their work with the kind of sacred intention that transforms ordinary activities into spiritual practices. The storyteller, sensing the deep attention of the audience, allows the tale to expand and breathe, adding details that weren't part of the basic narrative but that emerged spontaneously from the intersection of story and audience and moment. Perhaps the baker's cat, who keeps mice away from the grain stores, begins to exhibit unusual wisdom, offering advice to villagers through a series of meaningful meows and gestures. Maybe the bakery itself becomes a place of pilgrimage for people from neighboring villages who have heard about the miraculous bread and hope to receive not just physical nourishment but spiritual guidance as well. These embellishments don't detract from the story but enhance it, demonstrating the living quality of folklore that allows each telling to be slightly different while maintaining connection to the essential truths that the story carries. The narrative becomes a collaborative creation, shaped by the storyteller's skill and the audience's receptiveness and the particular magic of this specific evening in this specific place among this specific gathering of souls seeking meaning and connection. Between stories, the community settles into moments of comfortable silence that are just as important as the tales themselves. These quiet interludes allow the wisdom of each story to settle into the listener's consciousness like seeds planted in fertile soil, where they can take root and begin to grow in ways that will continue long after the evening ends. During these pauses, people sip their warm cider or herbal tea, adjust their positions in the comfortable chairs, and gaze into the dancing flames that seem to hold their own stories in the patterns of light and shadow they create. The silence is rich with the kind of contentment that comes from being exactly where you belong, doing exactly what feeds your soul. It's the satisfaction of a community that knows how to be together without needing constant entertainment or stimulation, people who have learned that some of life's greatest pleasures come from the simple act of sharing space and attention with others who value the same things you do. When the next story begins, it emerges from this silence like a flower blooming from well-tended earth. Perhaps it's a tale about a medieval monk who tends a garden where medicinal herbs grow with unusual vigor and potency. This monk has learned that plants respond not just to proper soil and water and sunlight, but to the quality of attention they receive from those who care for them. By speaking to the herbs as if they were dear friends, by expressing gratitude for their healing properties, by approaching his gardening work as a form of prayer, the monk creates conditions where the plants flourish beyond all expectation. The herbs from this monk's garden become famous throughout the region for their ability to heal not just physical ailments but emotional and spiritual distress as well. People travel great distances to visit the garden, and the monk welcomes them all with the same gentle attention he gives to his plants. He teaches visitors that healing happens not just through the application of remedies but through the cultivation of the right relationship with the forces of growth and renewal that operate throughout the natural world. This story, like the tale of the baker, carries multiple layers of meaning that listeners can explore according to their own needs and understanding. Some hear it as practical wisdom about the importance of approaching work with love and attention. Others receive it as spiritual guidance about the interconnectedness of all living things. Still others find in it a model for how to be of service to others while maintaining one's own inner peace and connection to the sacred dimensions of existence. As the evening progresses through this sequence of gentle, wisdom-filled tales, the atmosphere in the gathering space continues to deepen and intensify in the most beautiful way. The candles burn lower, creating more intimate pools of light. The air grows richer with the mingled fragrances of herbs and beeswax and the indefinable but unmistakable scent of human beings sharing space in love and trust. Bodies settle more completely into comfortable positions, and faces take on the peaceful expression of people whose souls are being nourished by exactly the kind of food they need. The boundary between the individual listeners and the collective experience of the community becomes increasingly permeable. People find themselves breathing in rhythm with one another, responding to the stories with subtle movements and expressions that demonstrate their deep engagement with the tales being told. The stories themselves seem to take on a life independent of the storytellers, moving through the assembled group like gentle currents of meaning and wisdom that touch each person according to their particular needs and capacities. This is the phase of the evening when folklore begins to work its most profound magic, when the ancient wisdom embedded in these traditional tales starts to seep into the consciousness of the listeners like healing water soaking into parched earth. The stories aren't just entertainment but medicine for souls that have been separated from the sources of meaning and connection that sustain human spirits. They offer reminders of possibilities that modern life often obscures, gifts of perspective that can transform ordinary experience into something rich with significance and beauty. As the medieval evening continues its gentle progression toward the deeper mysteries of night, the gathered community finds itself entering a realm of folklore where the stories become more intimate, more personal, and more directly connected to the profound questions that shape human existence. The tales that emerge during this phase of the evening carry a different quality of attention and engagement, as if the earlier stories have prepared the listeners' hearts and minds to receive wisdom of a more subtle and transformative nature. The candlelight has settled into a steady, peaceful rhythm that seems to breathe with the assembled community. The flames no longer dance with the restless energy of early evening but burn with the calm intensity of meditation, creating an atmosphere that naturally invites deeper contemplation and more profound connection to the spiritual dimensions of the stories being shared. In this gentle illumination, faces take on an almost luminous quality, as if the act of receiving ancient wisdom has awakened an inner light that radiates from each person gathered in this sacred space. The storyteller who takes the space now speaks with the kind of authority that comes not from academic study but from lived experience of the truths that folklore carries. This might be an elder whose long life has taught them how to recognize the patterns that connect individual experiences to the larger rhythms of existence, or perhaps a person whose work brings them into daily contact with the mysteries of life and death, growth and renewal, loss and transformation that form the deep currents of human experience. The story that begins to unfold speaks of a medieval village healer, a wise woman who has learned to work not just with herbs and remedies but with the subtle energies that flow through all living things. This healer lives at the edge of the village, in a cottage surrounded by gardens where medicinal plants grow in abundance, their leaves and flowers and roots offering remedies for every ailment that might trouble the human body or spirit. But this healer's greatest gift isn't her knowledge of plant medicine, profound though that knowledge may be. Her true skill lies in her ability to listen not just to the words her patients speak but to the deeper language of their souls, the unspoken griefs and longings and fears that often lie at the root of physical illness. She has learned that healing happens not through the mechanical application of remedies but through the restoration of harmony between the individual and the great web of relationships that connect all beings to one another and to the source of life itself. People come to this healer carrying burdens that go far beyond simple physical ailments. A mother arrives at the cottage door, her child sleeping fitfully in her arms, burning with a fever that has resisted all conventional treatments. As the healer examines the child, she perceives that the illness stems not from any infection or imbalance in the child's body but from a disturbance in the family's connection to their ancestral wisdom, a break in the chain of protection and blessing that should surround all children like an invisible but impermeable shield. The healing that follows involves more than herbal remedies, though the wise woman does prepare teas and tinctures from plants growing in her garden. She guides the mother through a process of remembering and reconnecting with the spiritual traditions of her family lineage, helping her to weave back together the protective bonds that illness had temporarily severed. Together, they create a healing ceremony that honors the child's ancestors, asks for their continued protection and guidance, and re-establishes the child's place in the long chain of love and care that extends backward through countless generations and forward into an equally infinite future. As the ceremony concludes and the child's fever breaks, the mother understands that what has been healed extends far beyond her child's immediate illness. The process has restored her own connection to sources of wisdom and power that she had forgotten she possessed, reminding her that she carries within herself all the resources necessary to protect and nurture her family. The child recovers not just his physical health but his rightful place in a community that knows how to surround its young ones with love and protection and blessing. This story resonates through the assembled listeners like ripples spreading across the surface of a still pond, touching each person according to their particular needs and experiences. Some find themselves remembering their own childhood experiences of being cared for during illness, the special quality of attention and love that sickness sometimes evokes from those who care for us. Others connect with their experiences as caregivers, recalling moments when they've felt the profound satisfaction of being able to provide comfort and healing to someone they love. Still others receive the story as a reminder of the importance of maintaining connection to the sources of wisdom and strength that exist beyond the individual ego, whether those sources are understood as ancestral wisdom, spiritual guidance, natural intelligence, or simply the accumulated knowledge of communities that have learned how to support their members through all the challenges that life presents. As this tale settles into the consciousness of the community, another storyteller takes up the thread with a narrative that explores different aspects of the same essential themes. This story speaks of a village blacksmith who has learned that his work with metal involves more than the simple transformation of raw materials into useful tools. Through years of patient attention to his craft, he has discovered that the process of heating and shaping iron mirrors the spiritual processes that shape human souls, and that his forge can become a place where transformation happens on multiple levels simultaneously. This blacksmith works with a quality of attention and intention that transforms his craft from mere labor into a form of spiritual practice. As he heats iron in the glowing coals of his forge, he meditates on the challenges faced by the person who will use the tool he's creating, infusing the metal with intentions of strength and durability and service. As he shapes the heated iron with hammer and anvil, he considers the ways that all beings must be shaped by the pressures and challenges of existence in order to become useful and beautiful and strong. The tools that emerge from this blacksmith's forge carry more than simple functionality. A plowshare blessed with intentions of abundance and sustainability helps farmers to work their land with greater effectiveness and less strain. A knife dedicated to the service of healing becomes an instrument that surgery performed with unusual skill and success. Horseshoes crafted with prayers for safe travel protect not just the horses that wear them but the riders who depend on them for transportation through the sometimes dangerous medieval landscape. Word of the blacksmith's special gift spreads throughout the region, and people begin to bring him not just their practical needs for tools and implements but their deeper longings for transformation and renewal. A young woman who has struggled with self-doubt asks him to create a small pendant that will remind her of her own inner strength. An elderly man who fears that his life has been wasted requests a walking staff that will help him find new purpose and meaning in his remaining years. The blacksmith accepts these requests not as a craftsman taking on unusual commissions but as a healer who understands that the tools he creates can serve as focal points for the spiritual work that each person must do to find their way toward wholeness and fulfillment. He works with each piece as if it were a sacred object, investing it with all the skill and intention and love that he can summon, trusting that the combination of his craftsmanship and the recipient's faith will create the conditions necessary for genuine transformation to occur. The stories continue to unfold, each one adding new layers to the understanding of how medieval communities maintained connection to the sources of wisdom and healing that sustained them through the challenges of existence in a world that could be harsh and unpredictable. These aren't tales of supernatural intervention or magical solutions to human problems, but narratives that illustrate the extraordinary possibilities that emerge when ordinary people learn to approach their work and their relationships and their daily experiences with the kind of attention and intention that recognizes the sacred dimensions of existence. A story emerges about a village teacher who discovers that learning happens most effectively when students understand their connection to the long chain of knowledge and wisdom that links each generation to all the generations that have come before and all those that will follow. This teacher creates learning experiences that help children understand that they are not just acquiring information but participating in the great ongoing conversation of human consciousness, adding their own voices to the chorus of understanding that has been growing since the beginning of time. Another tale speaks of a village weaver who has learned that the patterns she creates in cloth mirror the patterns that connect all beings in the web of existence. Her textiles become maps of relationship and connection, visual representations of the invisible bonds that link each person to their community, their landscape, their ancestors, and their descendants. People treasure garments made from her cloth not just for their beauty and durability but for their power to remind the wearer of their place in the great tapestry of being. Each story carries the listeners deeper into an understanding of the world that medieval folklore embodied and preserved, a world where the spiritual and the practical are not separate realms but different aspects of a unified reality that responds to human intention and care. In this worldview, every action has the potential to become a spiritual practice, every relationship offers opportunities for growth and service, and every challenge contains within it the seeds of transformation and renewal. As these tales weave their way through the consciousness of the assembled community, people find themselves naturally settling into states of deeper relaxation and receptivity. Bodies sink more completely into the embrace of comfortable chairs, breathing becomes slower and more rhythmic, and the gentle weight of accumulated wisdom begins to create the perfect conditions for the profound rest and renewal that the night promises to bring. As the evening progresses into its deeper phases, the gathered community finds itself naturally settling into the profound rhythms that connect human consciousness to the great cycles of rest and renewal that sustain all life. The stories that emerge during this phase carry a different quality, speaking directly to the soul's need for restoration and the spirit's longing for connection to sources of peace that exist beyond the reach of daily concerns and anxieties. The candlelight has dimmed to a soft, steady glow that no longer illuminates the entire space but creates intimate pools of warmth and comfort, leaving the edges of the room in gentle darkness that feels protective rather than threatening. This subtle shift in lighting naturally encourages the kind of inward attention that prepares consciousness for the deep rest that night provides, creating an environment where the boundary between waking and sleeping, between ordinary awareness and the profound receptivity of dreams, begins to feel wonderfully permeable. In this atmosphere of gathering peace, a storyteller begins to share a tale that speaks directly to the sacred nature of rest and restoration. The story tells of a medieval monastery where the monks have learned to approach sleep not as a mere biological necessity but as a spiritual practice that connects them to the divine rhythms that govern all existence. In this monastery, the transition from the active work of day to the restorative peace of night is marked by rituals and practices that honor sleep as a form of prayer, a way of surrendering individual will to the larger wisdom that operates through the cycles of rest and renewal. The monastery bell tower marks the hours of the day and night with bronze voices that carry across the surrounding countryside, calling not just the monastic community but all who hear them to remember the sacred dimensions of time's passage. As evening approaches and the bell rings for Compline, the final prayer service of the day, the monks gather in their chapel where candlelight creates an atmosphere of profound tranquility and connection to the eternal dimensions of existence. The prayers they offer at this final service of the day are not requests for specific favors or interventions but expressions of gratitude for the gifts of the day that is ending and acts of surrender to the mysterious processes of restoration that sleep will bring. The monks understand that in releasing consciousness into sleep, they participate in a daily practice of faith, trusting that the wisdom that sustains the universe will continue its work of healing and renewal while their minds rest in peaceful darkness. After the evening prayers conclude, the monks move through their final preparations for sleep with the same quality of attention they bring to their daytime prayers and work. Each action is performed with mindful care, the banking of fires to provide gentle warmth through the night, the closing of shutters to create an environment of protective darkness, the arrangement of simple bedding with gratitude for the comfort it will provide. In their individual cells, the monks continue their practice of approaching sleep as a spiritual discipline. They lie down on their simple beds with conscious intention to release the concerns and activities of the day, allowing their bodies to settle into complete relaxation while their spirits remain open to whatever gifts the night might bring. Some monks quietly recite prayers or sacred phrases that help to focus their minds on themes of trust and surrender. Others simply rest in silence, allowing the peace that pervades the monastery to soak into their consciousness like healing balm. The story describes how this practice of sacred sleep transforms not just the individual experience of the monks but the spiritual atmosphere of the entire monastery. The building itself seems to breathe with the rhythm of contemplative rest, its stone walls and wooden beams holding the accumulated peace of countless nights of conscious surrender to the restorative power of sleep. Visitors to the monastery often comment on the extraordinary quality of rest they experience there, as if the very air carries the vibration of profound peace and spiritual renewal. As this tale unfolds in the gentle candlelight, listeners find themselves naturally drawn into their own experiences of the profound satisfaction that comes from truly restful sleep. The story serves as a reminder that rest is not simply the absence of activity but a positive state of receptivity that allows the deepest processes of healing and renewal to unfold without interference from the restless activity of ordinary consciousness. The narrative continues with descriptions of how the practice of sacred sleep spreads beyond the monastery walls to touch the surrounding community. Families who live in the villages near the monastery begin to incorporate elements of this contemplative approach to rest into their own evening routines. Parents teach their children to approach bedtime not as an interruption of play but as a special time when the soul prepares to receive the gifts that dreams and deep sleep provide. These families develop their own rituals for honoring the transition from day to night, simple prayers of gratitude for the day's experiences, gentle conversations that help family members release any tensions or concerns that might interfere with peaceful rest, and the creation of sleeping environments that support the kind of deep relaxation that allows body and spirit to fully surrender to the restorative processes of night. Children in these families learn to look forward to bedtime as a time of special connection with parents and siblings, when the practical concerns of daytime give way to the intimate sharing of thoughts and feelings and dreams. They develop an understanding of sleep as a time when they can trust that they will be cared for and protected while their conscious minds rest, allowing them to approach sleep with confidence rather than anxiety. The story describes how this practice of conscious rest begins to transform the entire rhythm of life in the communities surrounding the monastery. People find that when they approach sleep with intention and reverence, they wake feeling more refreshed and renewed than they ever experienced when they simply collapsed into bed exhausted from the day's activities. Work becomes more efficient and enjoyable when it's balanced by truly restorative rest. Relationships improve as people find they have more patience and compassion when their spirits are regularly renewed through deep, peaceful sleep. As this narrative settles into the consciousness of the listeners, another storyteller begins to weave a complementary tale that explores the wisdom traditions surrounding the creation of spaces dedicated to rest and renewal. This story speaks of a medieval village where the community has collectively developed an understanding of how physical environments can support the spiritual practice of sacred sleep. The houses in this village are designed and arranged with conscious attention to the subtle energies that support restful sleep. Bedrooms are positioned to take advantage of the most peaceful orientations, with windows that allow gentle moonlight to enter while providing protection from harsh winds or disturbing sounds. The materials used in construction are chosen not just for their practical properties but for their ability to create atmospheres of tranquility and peace. The furnishings in these sleeping chambers reflect the community's understanding that rest is a sacred activity deserving of beauty and care. Beds are crafted from wood that has been seasoned and blessed, with mattresses stuffed with herbs that promote peaceful sleep and pleasant dreams. Linens are woven from fibers grown with special attention and care, dyed with colors that soothe the eye and calm the spirit. The story describes how the village as a whole participates in creating conditions that support the sacred practice of rest. As evening approaches, the community naturally shifts into quieter activities that prepare everyone for the transition into sleep. Conversations become more gentle and reflective, work activities wind down gradually rather than stopping abruptly, and the general pace of life slows to match the rhythm of the approaching night. Village elders share stories and wisdom that help community members process the experiences of the day and prepare their minds for the receptive state that sleep requires. These evening conversations serve multiple purposes. They strengthen the bonds of community connection, they provide opportunities for learning and growth, and they create the kind of peaceful mental state that naturally leads to restful sleep. Children in this village are especially blessed by the community's understanding of sacred rest. They grow up in an environment where bedtime is approached as a celebration rather than a struggle, where sleep is understood as a gift rather than an imposition. Parents and grandparents tell them stories that inspire beautiful dreams, teach them prayers and songs that calm anxious minds, and create bedtime rituals that help them feel safe and loved and protected as they surrender to sleep. The tale describes how this approach to sacred rest creates a positive cycle that strengthens the entire community. Well-rested people are more patient, more creative, more generous, and more capable of contributing to the collective well-being. Children who learn to approach sleep with reverence grow into adults who understand the importance of balancing activity with rest, work with contemplation, engagement with withdrawal. As these stories of sacred rest weave their way through the consciousness of the assembled listeners, the atmosphere in the gathering space naturally shifts to support the deeper contemplative states that the tales describe. Voices become softer, movements become slower and more deliberate, and the general quality of attention shifts from active engagement to receptive absorption. People find themselves naturally settling into positions of greater comfort and relaxation, allowing their bodies to demonstrate the wisdom that the stories describe. Breathing becomes deeper and more rhythmic, facial expressions soften into the peaceful countenance of souls that are being nourished by exactly the kind of wisdom they need, and the boundary between listening to stories about sacred rest and actually experiencing that rest begins to blur in the most beautiful way. The candles continue to burn with steady, peaceful flames that seem to breathe with the rhythm of the assembled community, creating an atmosphere that naturally supports the transition from active storytelling to the deeper receptive states that prepare consciousness for the profound gifts that the remaining hours of night will bring. As the evening continues its gentle progression toward the deep rest of night, the assembled community finds itself naturally entering a state of consciousness that exists in the beautiful borderland between waking awareness and the peaceful realm of dreams. The stories that emerge during this phase speak directly to the soul's capacity for transcendence, offering visions of spiritual transformation and connection that prepare listeners for the profound experiences that await in the depths of sleep. The candlelight has settled into an almost ethereal quality, each flame burning with perfect stillness that seems to exist outside the normal flow of time. The light no longer illuminates the physical details of the space but creates an atmosphere of luminous peace that seems to emanate from within rather than from any external source. In this gentle radiance, the faces of the listeners take on an almost translucent quality, as if the act of receiving these profound stories has awakened an inner light that shines through their peaceful expressions. A storyteller begins to share a tale that speaks of the mysterious realm where dreams and waking consciousness meet, where the spiritual dimension of existence becomes directly accessible to human awareness. The story tells of a medieval village where certain individuals have learned to navigate the subtle territories that exist beyond ordinary perception, serving as bridges between the practical world of daily life and the infinite realms of spiritual possibility. In this village lives a dream keeper, an elder whose long years of attention to the messages that come through sleep have given her the ability to help others understand and work with the wisdom that emerges from the unconscious depths of human consciousness. This dream keeper has learned that dreams are not simply random mental activity but communications from the deeper layers of the soul, gifts of guidance and healing that can transform ordinary life when they are received with proper attention and reverence. People come to the Dream Keeper carrying questions that cannot be answered through logical analysis or practical investigation. A young person struggling to understand their purpose in life seeks guidance about which path to follow. A couple experiencing difficulties in their relationship hopes to discover what changes might restore harmony between them. A farmer worried about his crops asks for insight into what the earth needs to produce abundance. The Dream Keeper receives each visitor with the kind of spacious attention that creates perfect conditions for deeper wisdom to emerge. She prepares special herbal teas from plants known to enhance the clarity and vividness of dreams, creates sacred spaces where people can sleep safely while remaining open to spiritual guidance, and offers prayers and rituals that invite benevolent spiritual forces to provide protection and assistance during the vulnerable process of dream work. Under the Dream Keeper's guidance, visitors learn to approach sleep not as an escape from consciousness but as an expansion of awareness into realms normally hidden from waking perception. They discover that the strange landscapes and mysterious characters that populate dreams often carry messages of profound importance, offering guidance that emerges from sources of wisdom far deeper than ordinary intellectual understanding. The young person seeking direction dreams of walking through a series of gardens, each representing a different possible path through life. In the dream, certain gardens feel immediately welcoming and nourishing, while others seem to drain energy and joy despite their apparent beauty. Upon waking, the dreamer understands with perfect clarity which direction will lead to fulfillment and which will result in a life of spiritual starvation, even though this understanding cannot be explained through logical reasoning. The troubled couple shares a remarkable mutual dream in which they see themselves as trees that have grown too close together, competing for light and space rather than supporting each other's growth. In the dream, they discover that by adjusting their positions slightly and learning to intertwine their branches in harmony, they can create a partnership that enhances the strength and beauty of both trees. This metaphorical guidance provides exactly the insight they need to transform their relationship from conflict to collaboration. The worried farmer dreams of walking through his fields in the company of his grandfather, who died many years before. In the dream, the grandfather shows him subtle signs in the soil and the plants that reveal what the earth needs to restore its fertility. More importantly, the grandfather teaches him prayers and rituals that will help him work with the land as a partner rather than trying to force it to produce according to his will alone. Each of these dream experiences provides not just practical guidance but spiritual transformation, changing the dreamer's understanding of their relationship to the deeper forces that shape existence. The Dream Keeper helps each person integrate these nocturnal revelations into their waking life, teaching them how to maintain connection to the sources of wisdom that emerge through sleep while remaining grounded in the practical responsibilities of daily existence. As this tale unfolds, listeners find themselves naturally drawn into their own memories of meaningful dreams, moments when sleep provided insights or comfort or guidance that couldn't have emerged through ordinary thinking. The story serves as a reminder that every person carries within themselves the capacity to receive wisdom through dreams, and that the practice of approaching sleep with reverence and attention can transform rest from mere biological necessity into active spiritual practice. The narrative continues with descriptions of how the Dream Keeper's influence gradually transforms the entire village's relationship to sleep and dreams. Families begin to incorporate dream sharing into their morning routines, creating opportunities for family members to offer each other the gifts of insight and inspiration that emerged during the night. Children learn to value their dreams as sources of creativity and guidance, developing an early understanding of the spiritual dimensions of existence that will serve them throughout their lives. The village develops customs and rituals that honor the wisdom that emerges through dreams. A special place is set aside where people can gather to share significant dreams with the larger community, creating opportunities for collective insight and guidance. Artists and craftspeople learn to draw inspiration from their nocturnal visions, creating works that express spiritual truths in forms that can be appreciated by others. As this story settles into the consciousness of the listeners, another narrative emerges that explores the ways that communities can create collective support for the spiritual practices associated with sacred rest and dream work. This tale speaks of a monastery where the monks have developed sophisticated understanding of how to work together to create optimal conditions for receiving spiritual guidance through sleep. In this monastery, the evening preparation for sleep involves not just individual practices but community rituals that align the spiritual intentions of all the monks, creating a collective field of receptivity that enhances each person's capacity to receive wisdom through dreams. The monks understand that spiritual insight often emerges not just through individual experience but through the mysterious ways that consciousness can be shared and amplified when people work together with common purpose. The monastery maintains a dream journal where significant dreams are recorded and studied, not as personal experiences but as messages that might carry guidance for the entire community. Over time, patterns emerge that reveal how spiritual wisdom flows through the collective consciousness of the group, offering insights about everything from practical decisions about the monastery's work to profound questions about the spiritual path that all the monks are traveling together. The story describes how this practice of collective dream work creates a spiritual atmosphere of extraordinary richness and depth. The monastery becomes known throughout the region as a place where seekers can come to receive spiritual guidance not just through conversation and study but through the powerful dream experiences that seem to emerge naturally in the monastery's atmosphere of focused spiritual intention. Visitors to the monastery often report having the most significant dreams of their lives during their stays, as if the collective practice of the monastic community creates conditions where individual consciousness can easily access the deeper sources of wisdom and guidance that spiritual traditions have always recognized as available to human awareness. As these tales of sacred dreaming weave their way through the consciousness of the assembled listeners, the physical atmosphere in the gathering space continues to shift in ways that support the deeper contemplative states the stories describe. The boundaries between individual awareness and collective consciousness begin to feel increasingly permeable, as if the shared experience of receiving these profound narratives has created a field of unified attention that transcends ordinary separations between self and other. People find themselves naturally synchronizing their breathing with the rhythm of the stories and with each other, creating a gentle harmony that seems to amplify the peaceful effects of the tales being shared. The weight of accumulated wisdom and the growing comfort of deep relaxation combine to create the perfect conditions for consciousness to begin its natural transition toward the realms of sleep and dreams that the stories have so beautifully described. The candlelight continues to burn with perfect serenity, creating pools of luminous peace that seem to exist outside normal time and space, inviting consciousness to rest in states of pure receptivity that prepare the soul for the profound gifts that await in the depths of night. As the evening reaches its deepest and most contemplative phase, the assembled community finds itself naturally settling into states of consciousness that mirror the profound peace and spiritual receptivity that the stories have so beautifully described. The transition from active listening to passive absorption happens so gradually and naturally that it becomes impossible to say exactly when the experience shifted from hearing tales about sacred rest to actually entering the blessed states that the folklore has illuminated. The candles have burned down to gentle stubs that cast the softest possible light, creating an atmosphere that exists in the perfect balance between visibility and darkness, allowing consciousness to rest in a space that supports both awareness and surrender. The few remaining flames flicker with the slow, hypnotic rhythm of meditation, their gentle movement creating subtle patterns of light and shadow that seem to breathe with the collective rhythm of the gathered community. In this atmosphere of gathering peace, the final stories emerge not as separate narratives but as gentle currents of wisdom that flow through the shared consciousness of the group like water finding its natural level. The boundary between storyteller and audience, between tale and experience, between past and present, dissolves into a unified field of receptive awareness that seems to exist outside the normal constraints of time and individual identity. A voice emerges from this collective space, speaking words that seem to arise from the accumulated wisdom of all the stories that have been shared, all the traditions that have been honored, all the ancient practices of spiritual rest and renewal that have sustained human souls through countless generations of seeking and surrender. The voice speaks of the monastery's bell tower as night reaches its deepest hour, when the bronze bells ring not to call people to action but to celebrate the sacred mystery of rest and renewal that operates through the cycles of darkness and light. The sound of these bells carries across the sleeping countryside like a benediction, touching the dreams of all who hear them with gentle reminders of the spiritual dimensions of existence that daylight consciousness often obscures. Farmers sleeping in their simple cottages find their dreams filled with visions of abundant harvests and harmonious relationships with the earth that sustains them. Craftspeople rest more deeply as their unconscious minds continue the creative work that began during daylight hours, receiving inspiration and insight that will guide their hands when morning comes. Children sleeping safely in their parents' arms experience dreams that nourish their growing spirits with images of beauty and wonder and connection to the great web of relationships that will support them throughout their lives. Elders resting peacefully in their comfortable beds find their sleep filled with the presence of loved ones who have passed beyond the physical realm but continue to offer guidance and comfort through the mysterious channels that connect all souls across the apparent boundaries of life and death. The monastery itself becomes a focal point for this collective experience of sacred rest, its stone walls and wooden beams holding the accumulated peace of countless nights of conscious surrender to the restorative power of sleep. In their individual cells, the monks rest in states of perfect trust, their bodies completely relaxed while their spirits remain open to whatever gifts the night might bring. Some continue to experience the gentle movement of breath as a form of prayer, each inhalation receiving the peace that surrounds them, each exhalation offering gratitude for the blessing of rest and renewal. Others have moved beyond even this subtle form of spiritual practice into states of pure receptivity where the ordinary sense of individual identity dissolves into direct experience of the unity that underlies all apparent separation. In these profound states of contemplative rest, consciousness expands to encompass not just the individual experience but the collective wisdom of the entire community, the accumulated peace of the monastery, and the infinite field of spiritual possibility that mystics have always recognized as the true ground of existence. The narrative voice continues to weave through this collective experience, describing how the practice of sacred rest spreads like gentle ripples across the entire landscape surrounding the monastery. Villages nestled in the valleys below find their own sleep deepened and enriched by the spiritual atmosphere that radiates from the hilltop where the monks maintain their practices of conscious surrender to the healing power of night. Travelers sleeping under the stars discover that their rest in this blessed region carries a quality of peace and renewal that they've never experienced elsewhere. The very earth seems to breathe with the rhythm of spiritual practice, offering support and nourishment not just to the physical body but to the soul's deep need for connection to sources of meaning and purpose that transcend the concerns of ordinary consciousness. Ancient trees that have stood sentinel over this landscape for centuries seem to participate in this collective experience of sacred rest, their deep roots drawing sustenance from underground streams that connect all living things, their branches reaching toward stars that shine with the light of infinite possibility. These trees have witnessed countless generations of human seeking and surrender, and they hold in their patient presence the accumulated wisdom of all the souls who have found peace and renewal in their protective shadows. Springs and streams that flow through this blessed landscape carry more than pure water, they bear the essence of all the prayers and meditations and acts of surrender that have been offered in their presence. The sound of water moving over stone becomes a form of natural music that supports and enhances the contemplative states of all who hear it, a gentle reminder that the processes of purification and renewal operate continuously throughout the natural world. As this final phase of storytelling continues, the very act of listening becomes indistinguishable from the experience of sacred rest itself. Consciousness settles naturally into states of profound receptivity where the ordinary chattering of the mind gives way to the deeper rhythms of being that connect individual awareness to the universal field of peace and wisdom that mystics have always known as our true home. Bodies sink completely into the comfortable embrace of chairs and cushions that seem to adjust themselves perfectly to provide exactly the support that each person needs. Breathing becomes so subtle and rhythmic that it requires no conscious attention, allowing awareness to rest in states of pure receptivity that mirror the deepest phases of meditative absorption. The remaining candlelight creates an atmosphere that seems to exist outside normal time and space, a realm where past and future dissolve into an eternal present moment that contains within itself all possibility for healing, transformation, and spiritual renewal. In this luminous darkness, consciousness discovers its capacity to rest in states of perfect peace that require no effort or intention, no maintenance or protection, but simply allow the soul to return to its natural condition of unity with the source from which all existence emerges. The gentle sounds that remain in this sacred space, the subtle whisper of breath, the soft settling of wax as candles burn lower, the distant suggestion of wind through trees that surround the building, create a natural symphony that supports and enhances the profound states of rest and renewal that the evening's journey has made possible. These sounds don't disturb the growing stillness but become part of it, like instruments in an orchestra that knows how to play the music of perfect peace. As consciousness settles ever more deeply into these blessed states of contemplative rest, the boundary between sleeping and waking becomes beautifully irrelevant. Whether awareness remains present to the subtle experiences of the moment or surrenders completely to the profound unconsciousness that allows the deepest healing to occur, the soul has found its way to the sources of renewal that it seeks, the wellsprings of peace and wisdom that restore and refresh the spirit for whatever challenges and opportunities await in the world of daylight activity. In these final moments of our contemplative journey through the gentle mysteries of medieval folklore, consciousness finds itself naturally settling into the deepest and most restorative states that human awareness can achieve. The accumulated wisdom of all the stories shared, all the traditions honored, and all the practices of sacred rest described throughout this long evening of community and connection has created the perfect conditions for the soul to release itself completely into the infinite peace that exists at the heart of all existence. The last candles burn with flames so small and steady they seem like tiny stars suspended in the gathering darkness, their light no longer illuminating the physical details of the space but creating an atmosphere of pure luminosity that appears to emanate from consciousness itself. In this ethereal radiance, the ordinary boundaries between inner and outer, between self and world, between individual awareness and universal being, dissolve into a unified field of peace that encompasses and transcends all possible experience. The voice that emerges from this collective space speaks now in whispers so gentle they seem like thoughts arising spontaneously in consciousness rather than words spoken aloud. These final offerings of wisdom don't require active listening but simply allow themselves to be absorbed directly into the depths of awareness where they can continue their work of healing and transformation long after the evening's formal gathering has ended. The monastery bell tower stands silent now in the deepest hour of night, its bronze voices at rest like everything else in this blessed landscape. But the silence that surrounds the tower isn't empty or void. It's filled with the accumulated prayers and meditations of all the souls who have ever sought refuge in the practices of sacred rest and contemplative surrender. This silence has substance and presence, like an invisible ocean of peace in which all individual experiences float like gentle waves that rise and fall without disturbing the fundamental stillness that underlies all movement and change. In their cells throughout the monastery, the monks have passed beyond even the subtlest forms of spiritual practice into states of pure being where consciousness rests in its own nature without any object or activity to maintain its attention. Some have entered the profound unconsciousness of deep sleep where healing and renewal operate below the threshold of awareness, restoring body and mind and spirit through processes too subtle and mysterious for ordinary understanding to grasp. Others remain suspended in the beautiful borderland between waking and sleeping, their awareness expanded to encompass vast fields of peace and possibility while their bodies rest in perfect stillness and comfort. In these liminal states, consciousness discovers its capacity to exist without effort or intention, simply being present to the infinite field of potential from which all experience emerges and into which all experience eventually returns. The village communities that nestle in the valleys surrounding the monastery have settled into their own profound rest, each family gathered safely in homes that have been blessed by generations of love and care and attention. Children sleep deeply in the protective embrace of parents whose own rest has been enriched by the spiritual atmosphere that radiates from the practices maintained on the hilltop above them. These children's dreams carry forward the wisdom and wonder that the day's stories have planted in their consciousness, allowing the seeds of spiritual understanding to take root in soil that has been prepared by the accumulated peace and devotion of their entire community. In their sleep, these young souls receive nourishment that will support their growth into adults who understand their connection to the sources of meaning and purpose that transcend individual concerns and desires. Their parents rest with the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing they have provided not just physical shelter and nourishment for their children but spiritual foundation that will sustain them through all the challenges and opportunities that life will present. In their own dreams, these adults continue to receive guidance and insight that helps them fulfill their roles as protectors and guides for the precious souls entrusted to their care. The elderly members of these communities sleep with particular grace and peace, their long experience of life's rhythms having taught them how to surrender completely to the restorative processes that operate through the cycles of rest and renewal. In their dreams, they often receive visits from loved ones who have passed beyond the physical realm, continuing relationships that death cannot sever and receiving assurance that the love they have given and received continues to operate across all apparent boundaries of time and space. The natural world that surrounds these blessed communities participates fully in this collective experience of sacred rest. Ancient forests stand in perfect stillness, their trees breathing with the slow rhythm of centuries, their roots intertwined in underground networks that carry nourishment and communication throughout the entire ecosystem. These forests hold in their patient presence the accumulated wisdom of countless seasons of growth and rest, death and renewal, teaching through their very existence the profound rhythms that govern all life. Streams continue their eternal journey through this landscape, carrying more than water as they flow from hidden springs through meadows and valleys toward distant seas. The sound of their movement becomes a form of natural meditation, a gentle reminder that the processes of purification and renewal never cease their work of maintaining the conditions necessary for life to flourish in all its magnificent diversity and beauty. Night-blooming flowers open their petals to receive the blessing of moonlight and starlight, their fragrances adding subtle sweetness to air that already carries the accumulated peace of an entire region dedicated to the practices of contemplative living. These flowers understand something profound about the rhythms of opening and closing, activity and rest, that human consciousness can learn from their patient example. The stars themselves seem to participate in this collective experience of sacred rest, their ancient light carrying across vast distances to touch this particular corner of the earth with gentle radiance that connects all observers to the infinite mystery of existence. Contemplating these distant suns from the comfortable darkness of earth, consciousness naturally expands to encompass perspectives that transcend the ordinary concerns of individual existence, finding refuge in awareness vast enough to hold all possible experience without being disturbed by any particular content. As these final moments of contemplative journey unfold, consciousness discovers its capacity to rest in states of perfect peace that require no maintenance or protection. Like a bird settling into its nest at the end of a long day of flight, awareness finds its way to the sources of rest and renewal that it has always carried within itself but may have forgotten how to access through the distractions and demands of ordinary activity. The breathing of all beings in this blessed landscape synchronizes into a collective rhythm that mirrors the great cycles of expansion and contraction that operate throughout the universe. Each inhalation receives the infinite peace that surrounds and sustains all existence. Each exhalation offers gratitude for the blessing of being able to participate consciously in the great mystery of existence. In this final phase of surrender, even the subtle sense of being someone who is resting or someone who is peaceful gradually dissolves into direct experience of peace itself, rest itself, being itself. Consciousness discovers that it doesn't need to achieve or maintain any particular state but can simply allow itself to return to its natural condition of unity with the source from which all experience emerges. The gentle sounds that remain in this sacred space, the whisper of breath, the settling of buildings and furniture, the distant suggestion of wind and water, become like lullabies sung by the earth itself, creating the perfect acoustic environment for consciousness to release all effort and surrender completely to the profound rest that awaits. As the last traces of individual awareness dissolve into the infinite field of peace that underlies and encompasses all possible experience, the soul finds itself returning to the source of all rest, all peace, all renewal. In this final surrender, consciousness discovers that it has never actually been separate from the infinite love and wisdom that creates and sustains all existence, and in this recognition, it finds the perfect rest that it has always been seeking. The candles flicker one final time and then settle into the steady burning that will carry their gentle light through the remaining hours of night, holding space for the profound healing and renewal that operates in the depths of sacred sleep. In this light, in this peace, in this perfect surrender to the infinite love that cradles all beings, consciousness finds its way home to the rest that passeth understanding, the peace that knows no opposite, the love that encompasses and transcends all possible experience. And in this holy darkness, blessed by all the wisdom traditions that have ever recognized the sacred nature of rest and renewal, surrounded by the accumulated prayers and devotions of countless souls who have found their way to these sources of healing and transformation, consciousness settles into the deepest possible rest, allowing the infinite love that creates and sustains all existence to complete its work of restoration and renewal in the perfect silence of the night.